Welcome to our channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. The scent of lilies was supposed to be a promise. It was supposed to be the fragrant harbinger of a new beginning, woven into the bouquets and centerpieces that would fill the garden at the Kingston estate. For Zina Benson, it had become the smell of anxiety. She stood in the middle of her small apartment, a place that felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. Every surface was buried under a layer of wedding preparation. Swatches of ivory chiffon, samples of calligraphed place cards, and a half-eaten container of 3 different cake flavors, red velvet, lemon raspberry, and chocolate espresso, cluttered the space. In the center of the coffee table, gleaming like a false idol, was her dress. The dress. It was a masterpiece of French lace and Duchess silk, a garment that had made her mother cry and her friends gasp when she'd first put it on. Now, it just looked like a costume for a play that was closing on opening night. Darius Kingston, her fiancé, had been distant for weeks. She chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, the immense pressure from his old money, Atlanta-based family. The Kingstons were legacy, their name etched into the foundations of banks and universities. Marrying into them was like being drafted into a beautiful, gilded army with strict rules of conduct. Zina, an ambitious graphic designer with her own small firm, had tried to see it as an adventure. But Darius's recent evasiveness, the missed calls, the excuses that evaporated like mist, it felt like more than nerves. Her phone buzzed, skittering across a stack of bridal magazines. It was Mimi, her little sister, her maid of honor. "Hey you," Zina answered, pressing the phone to her ear and sinking onto the couch, careful to avoid the dress. "Please tell me you finally decided on the raspberry filling. I'm having a democratic crisis over here." There was a pause on the other end. A beat too long. "Z, can you talk?" Zina's spine straightened. Mimi's voice was thin, strained. "Of course I can talk. What's wrong? Is it Mom?" No, Mom's fine." Another pause, filled with the sound of a shaky breath. It's me. I need to tell you something. And you're not going to want to hear it." A cold trickle of dread began to trace its way down Zina's spine. "Mimi, you're scaring me. Just say it." "I can't. Not over the phone. Can I come over? Now?" "Yes, of course. Just get here." Zina ended the call, her heart beginning a frantic, hammering rhythm against her ribs. Her mind raced through 1,000 terrible possibilities. An accident? An illness? Death? 20 minutes later, a key turned in the lock. Mimi still had a key. She slipped inside, and for a moment she just stood by the door, a silhouette against the fading evening light. She was beautiful, her sister. They shared the same rich mahogany skin and the same tall, willowy frame, but where Zina wore her hair in a sleek, natural cut that crowned her head, Mimi's fell in long, intricate braids. Tonight, her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with a guilt so profound it was a physical presence in the room. "Mimi?" Zina stood up, her arms crossed over her chest, a defensive posture she didn't even realize she'd adopted. Mimi didn't move from the door as if planning her escape route. "I've done something terrible, Zina. Something unforgivable." "What did you do?" The question was a whisper, the cold dread now a river freezing her in place. "It's about Darius." Mimi's voice broke on his name, and that single fracture told Zina everything and nothing all at once. The world narrowed to the space between them. The lilies suddenly smelled cloying, suffocating. What about him? Tears spilled over Mimi's lashes, tracing shiny paths down her cheeks. It started a few months ago. After your engagement party. It was just talking at first. He was stressed about the wedding, about his family, and I was just there. It was a mistake. We both knew it was a mistake, but we couldn't stop." Zina heard the words, but her brain refused to assemble them into a coherent meaning. It was like listening to a language she'd only studied in dreams. "Darius, Mimi, a few months ago. Couldn't stop." "Stop what?" Zina asked, her voice dangerously calm, a flat lake hiding a drowning current beneath. "What couldn't you stop, Mimi?" "We're in love, Zina." The words did not land like a blow. They landed like a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the sound, all the light out of the apartment. Zina actually took a step back, her heel catching on a fabric swatch. She gripped the back of the couch to steady herself. The lace of her wedding dress scratched against her palm. "You're what?" The question was absurd, pathetic. "I'm so sorry. He's so sorry. He was going to tell you. We both were. We knew we had to before the wedding." Mimi was sobbing now, her body trembling. "Please, you have to believe me. I never meant for this to happen. You're my sister. I love you." "You love me?" Zina's calm shattered. The words erupted from a place of raw, primal pain. "You love me? You're standing in my home, surrounded by the pieces of my wedding, and you're telling me you're in love with my fiancé? Don't you ever say you love me again." The force of her scream seemed to push Mimi back against the door. "He's miserable, Zina. The person he has to be for you, for his family, it's not him. With me he can just be himself. We laugh. We're happy." Each word was a shard of glass, meticulously aimed. Zina could see it now, the secret smiles, the times Mimi had bumped into Darius when he was out, the way she'd always been a little too eager to help with wedding planning to be around him. "Get out," Zina said, her voice trembling with the effort to contain the earthquake inside her. "Zina, please, we need to talk about this. Get out." The scream was raw, guttural. She snatched the nearest thing to her, the sample box of chocolate espresso cake, and hurled it. It missed Mimi and exploded against the door in a messy brown splatter of frosting and shame. Mimi flinched, fumbled for the doorknob and fled, her sobs echoing in the hallway. Zina stood there, alone in the ruins. The lilies, the lace, the chocolate on the door like a grotesque abstract painting. Her lungs refused to work. She stumbled to the balcony, wrenching the door open, gulping for air that wouldn't come. Her phone buzzed again on the floor. Once, twice, a third time. Mechanically she walked back inside and picked it up. Darius's face flashed on the screen, handsome, smiling, a lie. She answered. She didn't speak. "Zina?" His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was tight with apprehension. "Mimi just called me. She told me she told you. Baby, listen to me." The endearment, now the most vile word in the English language, broke the last of her restraint. "Don't," she whispered, the sound scraping her throat. "Don't you ever call me that again. We need to talk. I'm coming over. If you set foot near me, Darius Kingston, I will burn every single thing that connects you to me. I will call the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and tell them everything. Do you understand? You are dead to me." She ended the call. She didn't throw the phone. She simply placed it back on the table, next to a picture of her and Mimi as children, arms slung around each other, grinning gap-toothed grins. Then, slowly, she walked to the coffee table. She looked at the beautiful dress, the symbol of a future that had never been real. She picked it up, the silk cool and deceitful against her skin. She carried it to the balcony, the humid Atlanta air clinging to her. Without a sound, without a single tear, those would come later in torrents, she held the dress over the railing and let it go. It fluttered, a ghostly lace and silk parachute, falling 3 stories into the dirty alley below, landing in a puddle from that afternoon's rain. It was over. The altar was shattered. And Zina Benson was standing alone in the wreckage. The silence that followed the slammed door and the fallen dress was the loudest sound Zina had ever heard. It was a roaring, suffocating void where her future used to be. She didn't move from the balcony for a long time, staring at the white heap of silk and lace lying in the grimy alley below. It looked like a murdered ghost. The first tear came not as a sob, but as a hot, silent track down her cheek. Then another. Soon, she was shuddering, her grip on the railing the only thing keeping her upright as the seismic waves of betrayal finally cracked her open. She cried for the love she thought was real, for the trust that was now ash in her mouth, and for the sister who had driven the knife in with a smile. In the days that followed, the apartment became a museum of her own naivete. Every swatch of fabric, every calligraphed Mr. and Mrs. Kingston, was a monument to her foolishness. Her phone blew up, first with frantic, pleading texts from Darius, then with angry, justifying ones. Mimi's messages were a torrent of performative guilt, each, "I'm so sorry," feeling like another twist of the blade. "We couldn't help ourselves. Just happened. You're so strong, Zina. You'll find someone better." The subtext was as clear as glass. "You were not enough for him. I was better." Zina blocked their numbers. She ignored the door when her mother came by, calling her name with a worry that felt cloying and distant. The world outside her door was contaminated. Her own family was contaminated. The anger arrived a week later, a welcome, cleansing fire after the ice of shock and the flood of grief. It came while she was viciously stuffing the remaining wedding invitations into a trash bag. She remembered the look on Mimi's face. Not just guilt but a flicker of something else. Triumph. It was then that the old memories, glossed over by sisterly affection, resurfaced with brutal clarity. Mimi, 7 years old, deliberately breaking the neck of Zina's favorite doll because their grandmother had said it had the prettiest hair. Mimi as a teenager, borrowing, and then losing, the vintage jacket Zina had saved for months to buy. The backhanded compliments. "It's amazing you're so confident to wear your hair like that, Zina. I could never. Your little business is so cute. Almost like a real agency." It had never been about Darius. Not really. He was just the shiniest, most valuable trophy in a lifelong, silent competition Zina hadn't even known she was running. Mimi hadn't wanted him. She had wanted what Zina had. And the moment Zina had secured something truly magnificent, a handsome, wealthy fiancé from a powerful family, Mimi had to prove she could take it. The revelation was a poison and an antidote. It hollowed her out, knowing her sister's love was a lie. But it also freed her. This wasn't a failure on her part. It was a sickness on Mimi's. She couldn't stay in Atlanta. Every corner of the city whispered of the future that had been stolen. The Kingston name was everywhere, and the Benson family dinners would now be a war zone of pity and unspoken accusations. With a grim determination that felt like her only lifeline, Zina started packing. She wasn't running away, she was conducting a strategic retreat. She sold the unworn wedding dress online for a fraction of its cost, the transaction feeling like the sale of a used coffin. She shut down her fledgling design firm, telling her few clients a vague story about a family emergency. She took the money, packed a single suitcase with things that had no memory of Darius or Mimi attached to them, and bought a one-way ticket to New York City. It was cliché, but clichés existed for a reason. She needed to get lost. The woman who boarded the plane was a shell. The vibrant, optimistic designer was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful creature armored in cynicism. She had loved two people with her whole heart, and they had used that heart for target practice. As the skyline of Atlanta disappeared beneath the clouds, Zina made a promise to herself. She would never be that girl again. She would never be so trusting, so open, so blind. Love was a transaction, and she had just learned the hard way that the price was often everything you had. She leaned her head against the cool window, watching the world expand below her. The ashes of her old life were behind her. Now she had to figure out what, if anything, could grow in such scorched earth. The only thing she knew for certain was that it would be on her terms and hers alone. No more princes, no more sisters, just her. New York City did not care about her heartbreak. It was a glorious, brutal mercy. The constant, deafening hum of traffic and humanity was a balm to the echoing silence in her head. For 3 months, Zina moved through the city like a ghost, a specter in a black coat. She'd found a tiny, overpriced walk-up in Brooklyn, its blank walls a canvas for her nothingness. She took freelance design jobs she found online, the work mindless and uninspiring, just a way to pay for the roof and the coffee that tasted like acid. She'd adopted a uniform of sorts, dark jeans, boots, a rotation of simple sweaters. Her once precise makeup routine was abandoned. The vibrant woman who chose bold colors and statement earrings was packed away in a box labeled before. This Zina was monochrome. The anger had subsided into a low, perpetual hum of mistrust. It was her new constant companion. She trusted her barista to not burn the coffee. She did not trust people. The encounter happened on a rain-slick Thursday evening. She was leaving a soul-crushingly dull meeting with a client who wanted a logo that was serif, but also sans serif, and maybe a little playful but extremely corporate. Her head was pounding. She'd taken refuge in the hushed, hallowed silence of the Morgan Library, needing to be surrounded by beautiful, timeless things that held no memories for her. She was standing before a delicate Rembrandt etching, losing herself in the intricate lines, when a man's voice, low and calm, spoke beside her. "It's the vulnerability, isn't it? In the face. He captures it so perfectly." Zina started, so unused to being addressed that the sound was physically jarring. She turned. The man was tall, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that whispered of expense without shouting it. He had sharp, intelligent features, pale skin, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wasn't handsome in a classic magazine cover way. His was a severity, a quiet intensity that commanded the space around him. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the etching. "I suppose," Zina said, her voice rusty from disuse. She made to move away, her walls instantly slamming up. "Rich, handsome stranger. Category, dangerous. Most people miss it," he continued as if they were in the middle of a conversation. "They see the technique, the skill. They don't see the humanity he managed to press into the copper plate." Finally, he turned those icy blue eyes on her. They were assessing, but not in the way men usually assessed her. This was more like he was cataloging her reaction to the art. "You saw it." It wasn't a question. Zina felt oddly seen herself, her little moment of connection with the art noticed by a complete stranger. It was unnerving. "I should go," she said, taking a step back. "Christopher Harrington," he said, offering a hand. Not a smile. Just a statement of fact. The name meant nothing to her. She deliberately stopped paying attention to the world of billionaires and business titans. Reluctantly, she shook his hand. His grip was firm, cool. "Zina," she replied, offering nothing more. "Zina," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his accent, clipped, precise, important. "You look like you hate the world right now." The bluntness was so shocking it almost made her laugh. "Almost. Is it that obvious?" "To someone who recognizes the expression," he said, his gaze drifting back to the etching. "It's a useful state for a time. It keeps the distractions away." They stood in silence for another moment, two solitary figures in a quiet room, united by a 400-year-old piece of art and a shared, unspoken understanding of bitterness. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "It's business. And before you assume otherwise, it is not the kind of proposition you're thinking." Zina raised an eyebrow. "You have no idea what I'm thinking." "I'm a very good reader of people, Zina. It's how I've made my money." "You're thinking you need to get away from the strange man in the art museum. You're thinking your life is complicated enough. You're thinking trust is a currency you're fresh out of." She stared at him, utterly disarmed. He had looked right through her monochrome armor as if it were glass. "What's the proposition?" she asked, against her every screaming instinct. "I require a wife," he said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "In a contractual sense. For 2 years. It would involve a significant financial compensation for your time and a guarantee of your complete independence at the term's end. You would be required to act as a social shield at a number of tedious events. In return, you would have access to resources that could expedite the process of forgetting." Zina's first reaction was to laugh in his face. It was the most absurd, insulting thing she had ever heard. Yet, the laugh died in her throat. She looked at him, this severe, lonely-looking man surrounded by priceless art, and she saw not a predator but a pragmatist. He was offering a transaction. Clear, cold, and simple. No lies. No promises of love. Just a mutually beneficial arrangement. It was the most honest proposal she'd received since coming to New York. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because," he said, his wintry eyes holding hers, "you look like you have nothing left to lose. And I find that to be the most trustworthy quality a person can have." The contract arrived by courier the next morning, a thick, creamy envelope that felt heavy with consequence. Zina left it on her small kitchen table for 6 hours, staring at it every time she walked past as if it were a sleeping viper. Christopher Harrington's proposition was insane. It was the kind of thing that happened in the paperback novels her mother left on beach towels, not in real life. Yet, the memory of his blunt assessment, "You look like you have nothing left to lose," echoed in the silence of her apartment. It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in months. Finally, she slit the envelope open. The document inside was dense with legalese, but its terms were starkly clear, just as he'd promised. A 2-year term. A monthly stipend that made her eyes widen, with a 7-figure sum deposited into a private account upon the contract's conclusion. A separate, generous budget for a new wardrobe and anything else required for the role. A penthouse apartment on Central Park West, his residence, where she would have her own suite of rooms. Absolute discretion mandated. At the end of 2 years, a quiet, uncontested divorce, and she would walk away with her money and her freedom, no questions asked. It was a business merger. She was being hired to play the part of Mrs. Christopher Harrington. Her first instinct was to refuse. to throw the contract away and continue her gray, anonymous existence. But then she thought of Mimi's triumphant tears. She thought of Darius's condescending pity. She thought of the wedding dress lying in a dirty puddle. This wasn't just an escape. It was a weapon. A chance to rebuild herself not from scratch, but from solid, impenetrable gold. She signed the document. The transformation began with a single phone call from a woman named Eleanor, Christopher's impeccably efficient personal assistant. Within days, Zina was extracted from her Brooklyn walk-up and installed in a penthouse that seemed to float above the treetops of Central Park. The air itself smelled different up here, cleaner, quieter, expensive. Her new rooms were a masterpiece of minimalist design, all neutral tones and floor-to-ceiling windows. It was beautiful and utterly soulless. It was perfect. Christopher was true to his word. He was a ghost in his own home, a presence felt more than seen. They moved around each other with a polite, detached choreography. He was often gone before she woke, and his dinners were business affairs she was not invited to. Their interactions were brief, clinical updates via Eleanor or the occasional shared car ride to their first few public engagements. A charity auction, a symphony opening. It was before the first of these events that the stylists arrived. A small, silent army descended upon her, armed with fabrics and color palettes. They tutted over her serviceable sweaters and dark jeans, not unkindly, but with the professional dismay of artists presented with a blank, neglected canvas. Zina sat stiffly as they worked, a queen being prepared for a coronation she never wanted. They softened her natural hair, conditioning it until it shone. A makeup artist with gentle hands showed her how to accentuate her cheekbones, to line her eyes in a way that was not for allure, but for unshakable poise. She was measured, poked, and pinned. Then came the clothes. They weren't just dresses and suits. They were armor. A column of crimson silk that wrapped around her body like a flag of victory. A tailored black tuxedo jacket that sharpened her shoulders and screamed of authority. A gown the color of midnight, studded with tiny crystals that caught the light like a starry sky. Each piece was chosen not for a man's pleasure, but for a woman's power. She looked in the full-length mirror and didn't see the broken-hearted girl from Atlanta. She saw a stranger, elegant, formidable, untouchable. The first time she walked into a room on Christopher's arm, the air shifted. The press of socialites and financiers parted slightly. Whispers followed them. "Who is that? Harrington's wife? I didn't know he'd remarried. She's stunning." Christopher played his part flawlessly. His hand was a light, impersonal guide on the small of her back. He introduced her with a cool, proprietary pride. "My wife, Zina." He never elaborated. The mystery was part of the strategy. And Zina? Zina discovered she was a natural. The part of her that had died with Darius and Mimi had been the soft, trusting part. What was left was a core of cold, observant steel. She learned to offer a smile that didn't reach her eyes, to exchange pleasantries that were perfectly polite and utterly revealing of nothing. She was beautiful, charming, and as emotionally accessible as a glacier. To her own surprise, a quiet understanding, a form of respect, grew between her and Christopher. They were allies in a shared performance. They never spoke of their past. They never spoke of love. But in the silent car rides home after a successful evening, a look would sometimes pass between them. A look of two soldiers who had survived another battle in a pointless war. One night, after a particularly draining gala, they stood on the vast terrace of the penthouse, the lights of the city sprawling before them. It was the first time they had been in the same room without the pretext of an event. "You handled the press well tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. The question about children was impertinent. "I learned from the best," she replied, taking a sip of the whiskey he'd poured for her. It burned a pleasant path down her throat. Deflect with a vague answer and a change of subject. "It's all a game, isn't it?" "Everything is a game, Zina," he said, looking out at the skyline. "The only choice is whether you decide to play or be played." She looked at his profile, sharp and lonely against the glittering city. He had built this gilded cage for himself and had now brought her into it. But she wasn't a prisoner. She was a fellow architect. The woman who had arrived in New York heartbroken and penniless was gone. In her place stood Mrs. Harrington, poised, powerful, and protected by a fortress of wealth and indifference. The ashes had settled. And from them, something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous had begun to rise. She was no longer just playing the part. She was becoming it. The rhythm of their arrangement had become its own kind of strange comfort. By day, Zina was reclaiming her ambition. With Christopher's resources, presented not as a gift but as a necessary tool for her role, she had quietly relaunched her design firm. Zina Benson Design, now operated out of a sun-drenched studio a few blocks from the penthouse, her client list growing through whispered recommendations from the very social circles she was meant to be charming as his wife. It was her secret rebellion, her anchor to the real world. By night, she was Mrs. Harrington, a vision in couture, her smile a polished shield. She and Christopher had settled into a seamless, silent partnership. They could navigate a room without words, a slight tilt of his head guiding her toward an important investor, a subtle touch of her hand on his arm warning him away from a tedious bore. But the silence in the penthouse was changing. It was no longer just empty, it was charged. A natural romantic tension had begun to weave itself through their clinical interactions, invisible and undeniable. It was in the way his hand would linger a second too long when helping her with her coat, the warmth of his fingers searing through the fabric. It was in the way she'd catch him watching her from across the room as she read, his icy blue gaze thoughtful, almost warm. It was in the shared late-night whiskey on the terrace, where conversations strayed from stock markets and social strategies to debates about best-selling novels and the merits of abstract art, their words weaving a connection that had nothing to do with their contract. One evening, a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to both of them arrived. Eleanor placed it on the silver tray in the foyer with her usual efficiency. Christopher slid it open with a letter opener, his eyes scanning the elaborate script. A faint, almost imperceptible frown touched his lips. "The Atlanta Children's Hospital Annual Benefit Gala," he read aloud, his voice neutral. He looked up at her. "It's next month." The air left Zina's lungs. Atlanta. The name was a key turning in a lock she'd sealed shut. The city was a museum of her humiliation, a ghost she'd fled 3,000 miles to escape. She turned from the window where she'd been watching the sunset paint the skyline gold. "We'll decline, of course." It wasn't a question. Christopher was quiet for a moment, watching her. He saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her shoulders had drawn back. He saw the ghost of the hurt woman she'd been before she'd built her armor. "It's a significant cost. My company has donated heavily for years. My absence would be noted. Send a larger donation. Eleanor can draft a regret." Her voice was sharper than she intended, the polished Mrs. Harrington facade cracking to reveal the raw Zina underneath. He placed the invitation down carefully. "They will be there, won't they?" He didn't need to say their names. They hung in the air between them. "Darius. Mimi." Zina didn't answer. She just wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of protection he'd never seen from her before. She was always so impeccably composed. "This is the part where you run," he said, his voice low. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "I'm not running," she fired back, the anger a welcome heat. "I'm being practical. Why would I willingly walk into a room with the two people who," she trailed off, unable to give the pain words. "Who betrayed you?" he finished for her. He took a step closer. "Precisely." She looked at him, confused. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you are no longer the woman they hurt." He gestured around them, at the panoramic view, at her, at the invisible mantle of power and wealth she now wore as naturally as she breathed. "You left that woman in a puddle in an Atlanta alley. Look at what you've built. Look at who you are." He was in front of her now, close enough for her to smell the clean, crisp scent of his soap, to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. The space between them hummed with the unspoken thing that had been growing for weeks. "This," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "this is the victory tour, Zina. Not a retreat." Her heart was hammering. He was offering her more than just an appearance at a gala. He was offering her a reclaiming. A closure she hadn't known she needed. "You want me to go back there?" she whispered. "With you. I want you to hold your head up in a room where they tried to make you bow it," he corrected, his gaze intense. "I am your husband. That, for the moment, is a fact. Let me be your armor. Let me be the undeniable proof that their betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to you." The romantic tension that had been a slow-burning ember now flared into a blaze. This wasn't about business. This was personal. For both of them. He wasn't doing this for a contract, he was doing it for her. She saw the truth in his eyes. He wanted to stand beside her. He wanted to watch them realize what they had lost. He wanted to be the one who gave her that power. Zina looked from his determined face to the invitation on the table. The elegant script seemed to taunt her. For 3 years she had defined herself by their betrayal. Now, Christopher was handing her a chance to redefine herself by her own stunning resilience. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the fear and the anger coalescing into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in her chest. She met his gaze, her own eyes clear and fierce. "All right," she said, her voice steady now, filled with a new purpose. "We'll go." A slow, rare smile touched Christopher's lips, a real one, not the polite social mask he wore. It transformed his severe face, and for a breathtaking second, Zina saw the man behind the billionaire. "Good," he said, the single word laden with a promise. He picked up the invitation. "Eleanor will RSVP. We have work to do." The private jet touched down in Atlanta with a whisper, a stark contrast to the roaring, emotional turbulence inside Zina. The humid Georgian air that greeted them on the tarmac was thick with memory. It smelled of magnolias and old pain. In the sleek, black town car en route to the hotel, Zina was silent, her hand resting in Christopher's. It was part of the performance, she told herself. A united front. But his grip was firm, his thumb making a slow, steadying arc across her knuckles. The gesture felt less like acting and more like an anchor. "The narrative is simple," Christopher said, his voice cutting through her reverie. He was in strategist mode, his gaze fixed on the passing skyline. "We are here for the children's hospital. We are happy. We are untouchable. You will not look for them. You will let them find you." Zina nodded, her throat too tight for words. She was wearing a simple cashmere travel set, but her armor, a gown of liquid silver, the Harrington diamonds, waited in a garment bag. She felt like a warrior being driven to the battlefield. Hours later, standing before the full-length mirror in their palatial hotel suite, she barely recognized herself. The dress was a masterpiece, a second skin of cool, gleaming metal that draped and hugged her every curve. The diamonds at her ears and throat were not delicate ornaments. They were statements of conquest, catching the light and throwing it back in defiant sparks. Her hair was swept into an elegant, intricate knot, revealing the graceful line of her neck. Her makeup was flawless, emphasizing the regal arch of her cheeks, the determined set of her mouth. She looked powerful. She looked expensive. She looked healed. Christopher entered the room, adjusting the cufflinks of his impeccably tailored tuxedo. He stopped when he saw her, his movements stilling. For a long moment, he simply looked at her reflection in the mirror, his expression unreadable. "Will I do, Mr. Harrington?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. He crossed the room until he stood behind her. His eyes met hers in the glass. "You are devastating, Mrs. Harrington," he said, his tone low and utterly sincere. He placed his hands on her bare shoulders. His touch was electric against her skin, and a shiver traced its way down her spine. He held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary before carefully fastening the diamond necklace around her throat. The cool stones settled against her skin, a final, weighty piece of the armor. The ballroom of the Grand Georgian Hotel was a whirl of light, music, and money. It was exactly as she remembered, the same opulent chandeliers, the same cloying scent of thousands of white roses. For a moment, Zina was 25 again, heart full of a love that was a lie, blind to the snake in her garden. Christopher's hand on the small of her back was a steadying pressure. "Breathe," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "The room is already yours. They just don't know it yet." And then they entered. It started as a ripple. A conversation would stutter to a halt as they passed. A glass would pause halfway to a parted lip. The music from the string quartet seemed to swell, as if scoring their procession. Whispers followed them, a hissing undertow of curiosity and awe. "Is that Christopher Harrington? But who is that with him? His wife? I heard he remarried but..." Zina held her head high, her smile a serene, closed-lipped curve. She focused on the feel of Christopher's solid presence beside her, on the weight of the diamonds, on the countless hours she'd spent learning to command a room just like this one. They were halfway to their table, gracefully accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, when she felt it. A specific, intense stare that felt like a cold finger drawn down her spine. Her social radar, finely tuned over 3 years, pinged with violent intensity. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She followed Christopher's lead as he guided her toward a group of hospital board members, her laugh at his quiet remarks sounding genuine and effortless. It was from this position of strength, surrounded by admirers, that she finally allowed her gaze to drift casually across the room. And there they were, Darius and Mimi. They were standing near the champagne fountain, a picture of Atlanta's golden couple. He was handsome in his tuxedo, every inch the Kingston air. Mimi was clinging to his arm, resplendent in a blush-pink gown, her smile bright and brittle. They were frozen. Utterly, completely frozen. Mimi's champagne flute was tilted at a precarious angle, the bubbly liquid threatening to spill over her glove, utterly forgotten. Her famous smile had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare of pure, unadulterated shock. The calculation, the envy, the triumph, all of it was wiped clean, replaced by the blank, pale horror of someone seeing a ghost they never expected to face. Darius was worse. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. All the color had drained from his face. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, were locked on Zina. They scanned her, from the diamonds in her hair to the silver of her gown, and it was not admiration she saw in his gaze. It was a dawning, horrifying comprehension. It was the look of a man realizing he had bet on the wrong horse, traded a masterpiece for a cheap forgery, and the entire world was about to know it. The noisy ballroom seemed to shrink, the crowd blurring into an indistinct haze. For a single, crystalline moment, there were only the four of them in a silent, searing tableau of cosmic reckoning. Zina held Darius's shocked gaze for one beat. She allowed a fraction of a smile, not of warmth but of cold, serene acknowledgement, to touch her lips. Then, as if she'd seen nothing more interesting than a piece of bland art, she turned back to the board member who was speaking, leaning in to listen as if his words were the most fascinating thing she had ever heard. The spell was broken. The moment passed. But the image of their frozen, shattered faces was burned into the back of her eyelids. She had arrived. And she had, without uttering a single word, already won. The air around their table crackled with a new energy. The hospital board members, initially focused on Christopher, now directed their attention and their questions to Zina, captivated by her easy grace and sharp, intelligent responses. She was the sun and they were planets in her orbit. Christopher watched her, a faint, proud smile playing on his lips, a look that was no longer for show. Across the room, the frozen tableau had shattered into frantic, hushed motion. Zina, from her peripheral vision, saw Mimi's head bent close to Darius's, her face a mask of panicked, furious whispers. Darius was staring into his champagne glass as if seeking answers at the bottom, his shoulders hunched in a defensive posture she knew all too well. The golden couple was tarnished, their shine dimmed by the brilliant, unforgiving light of her presence. The evening progressed. Dinner was served, speeches were made. Zina laughed at the right moments, applauded generously, and all the while, she could feel the heat of their stares like twin laser points on her skin. She was exquisitely aware of them, but she never gave them the satisfaction of a direct look. Her indifference was the sharpest weapon in her arsenal. It was during the dessert course that they finally broke. The crowd had loosened, people mingling between tables. A path cleared, and there they were, standing hesitantly at the edge of their group. Mimi looked pale. Darius looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Zina? Mimi's voice was a thin, reedy thing, a ghost of the performative confidence she usually wielded. My God, it is you. All conversation at their table ceased. Christopher slowly placed his fork down, his expression turning cool and watchful, a king observing interlopers in his court. Zina turned her head, a study in polite, mild surprise. Mimi, Darius, she said, her voice a smooth, calm lake. What a surprise. The understatement was so vast it was almost humorous. We didn't know you were in town, Darius stammered, his eyes darting from her face to Christopher's imposing figure and back again. My wife and I are patrons of the hospital, Christopher interjected, his tone devoid of warmth. He didn't stand. He simply extended a hand. Christopher Harrington. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Darius, raised in a world of old money, knew exactly what it signified. New York. A fortune that dwarfed the Kingston legacy. He shook Christopher's hand, his own grip likely weak. Darius Kingston. And this is my wife, Mimi. Wife? Zina repeated, the word a soft, considering bullet. She let her gaze drift over Mimi's pale pink gown, a choice that suddenly seemed childish next to her own metallic splendor. Congratulations. I must have missed the announcement. She took a sip of her wine, her hand perfectly steady. The silence stretched, agonizing. Mimi's eyes were desperately trying to take it all in. The diamonds, the dress, the devastatingly powerful man at Zina's side who looked at her with a possession Darius had never mastered. You look, well, Mimi finally blurted out, the envy curdling the compliment into something sour. I am, Zina said, her smile finally reaching her eyes, making them glitter with a hard, beautiful light. Extremely. She let the word hang there, loaded with meaning. Darius found his voice, a pathetic attempt to regain footing. What have you been? That is, what do you do now? It was Christopher who answered, his voice a low, proud rumble. My wife is an exceptionally talented designer. She runs her own firm in New York. She's just secured a major contract with the Met. It was a slight exaggeration, the talks were ongoing, but the way he said it with such unwavering certainty made it fact. Zina felt a surge of gratitude so fierce it stole her breath. This was their script, but he was delivering his lines with a conviction that went far beyond their contract. Mimi looked physically ill. The narrative she'd built, that she had saved Darius from a dull, unremarkable life, was collapsing in ruins around her. She hadn't stolen a prize, she'd taken a consolation gift. We should let you get back to your friends, Darius said quickly, already pulling Mimi away. His retreat was a rout. There were no barbs, no clever remarks. They were simply defeated. As they fled into the crowd, Christopher turned to Zina. The cold mask was gone, replaced by an expression of fierce, unguarded admiration. He raised his glass to her, a private toast. The band struck up a new song, something slow and sweeping. Without a word, Christopher stood and offered her his hand. It wasn't part of the plan. But nothing tonight had gone according to the old plan. She placed her hand in his and he led her to the dance floor. He pulled her close, his hand a firm, warm weight on the small of her bare back. They moved together perfectly as if they'd been dancing this way for years. You were magnificent, he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. It was the dress, she demurred, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was not the dress, he said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. The noise of the gala faded away. There was only the music and the feel of his body against hers, and the startling truth in his gaze. It was you, Zina. It has always been you. The wall she had built so carefully, the fortress of ice around her heart, began to melt under the heat of his look. This was no longer a transaction. This was no longer revenge. He had seen her broken and offered her a tool. He had seen her strength and helped her sharpen it. He had stood beside her not just as a business partner, but as a believer. And in that moment, staring up at him, she realized the most shocking truth of all. She wasn't pretending anymore. She leaned her head against his chest, letting him guide her across the floor. She didn't look to see if Mimi and Darius were watching. Their opinion no longer held any space in her world. The past was finally, truly behind her. The music swelled. Christopher's hold on her tightened just slightly. And as they turned under the glittering lights, Zina knew with a certainty that shook her to her soul that the contract would end. But this terrifying, wonderful, real thing growing between them, was only just beginning. The revenge was complete. The new beginning was hers for the taking. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.